Under the vaulted ceiling of Kuala Lumpur's convention centre, where ASEAN Defense Ministers had gathered for their annual dialogue, the air was tense but charged with purpose. Cameras whirred softly, capturing every flicker of expression as US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth took his seat, a figure visibly determined to make his words count. This was not a routine address. It was a statement of warning, diplomacy and defiance, aimed squarely at Beijing's expanding shadow in the South China Sea. When Hegseth began to speak, his tone was deliberate, measured, but unmistakably forceful. When I was with many of you at the Shangri-La dialogue, he reminded his counterparts, I noted in my speech that China's behaviour toward its neighbours and the world was a wake-up call, which it certainly is. He paused briefly, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. You shared examples of intimidation, harassment and illegal activities occurring in your territorial waters and throughout the South China Sea. Unfortunately, in the months since, China's destabilizing actions have only intensified. You have seen it. The world has seen it. It has been filmed. Some of you have been direct victims. The ministers in attendance exchanged glances, each of them aware of the realities Hegseth described. From the Philippines Coast Guard facing ramming incidents near Scarborough Shoal to Vietnam's repeated complaints of grey zone coercion, the list was long and familiar. Behind closed doors, ASEAN officials had already discussed the mounting evidence, satellite footage, Coast Guard reports and viral videos showing Chinese vessels using high-pressure water cannons to block supply boats. Hegseth pressed on, his voice sharpening. They ram and water cannon ships and claim without basis that there is trespassing. They unlawfully claim jurisdiction over waters that do not belong to them. They attempt to regulate and limit the peaceful military actions of other nations, including the site of the ADM-M+ maritime exercise scheduled for next year. And we recently saw Beijing unjustifiably claim Scarborough Shoal as, and I quote, a nature reserve. Again, you don't build platforms in nature reserves. The room murmured softly at that remark. A quiet ripple of recognition. Scarborough Shoal had long been a flashpoint, contested between China and the Philippines. Beijing's latest move to designate it as an ecological sanctuary had raised eyebrows across the region, particularly after images surfaced of new buoys and patrol boats stationed nearby. Hegseth's jab carried both irony and accusation, a nature reserve fortified by steel and surveillance. And yet another attempt, he added, to impose new advanced territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea at your expense. His words struck a chord, not just diplomatically but symbolically. For ASEAN, the phrase, at your expense, underscored years of frustration, a regional bloc long committed to neutrality, now struggling to balance between economic ties with China and growing security reliance on the United States. As his speech continued, Hegseth's rhetoric softened, but his message remained firm. China's provocative actions also demonstrate a lack of respect for your countries, he said, his tone adopting a more reflective cadence. They challenge and threaten your territorial sovereignty. China's sweeping territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea run counter to its commitments to resolve disputes peacefully. Behind him, screens displayed maritime charts, colourful lines marking exclusive economic zones overlapping across the South China Sea. Vietnam's line brushed against Malaysia's. The Philippines' claim intersected with China's infamous 9-dash line, which slices through nearly 90% of the sea. It was a visual reminder of why the issue was so intractable, overlapping sovereignties, layered histories, and a waterway vital to global trade. Hegseth continued, obviously both our presidents, President Trump and Chairman Xi, have had their discussions. Both myself and Dong Jun have had opportunities to talk. Here, the opportunity to talk is something we value. We will continue. Our dialogue is important. But inside that dialogue, we are most watching actions very closely. The words watching actions resonated like a veiled warning. Washington's dual-track approach, dialogue and deterrence, has long defined its strategy toward Beijing. It was an acknowledgement that conversation alone was no longer enough. We seek peace, he concluded. We do not seek conflict. But we must ensure that China is not seeking to dominate you or anybody else. For the gathered ASEAN ministers, that closing line struck at the heart of the matter. The South China Sea, a 3.5 million square kilometre expanse rich in fish, oil and gas, has become one of the most militarised waterways on Earth. Yet most of the nations bordering it, from Malaysia to Brunei, lack the naval or coast guard capability to counter China's increasingly assertive manoeuvres. In recent months, the situation had grown even more precarious. Satellite imagery revealed expanded Chinese presence at Subi Reef and Mischief Reef, both artificial islands within the Spratly chain. The US Navy, in turn, had stepped up its freedom of navigation patrols, sailing destroyers within 12 nautical miles of those installations to challenge Beijing's claims. Each move was calibrated, measured, but fraught with risk. In Kuala Lumpur, those risks were more than theoretical. Malaysia itself has faced Chinese survey ships operating near its exclusive economic zone, often shadowing drilling rigs or fishing boats. For Southeast Asian nations, the challenge is not just military, it's economic and political. China remains their largest trading partner, yet its actions increasingly undermine the sovereignty they fiercely guard. As Hegseth's remarks circulated across newswires and television broadcasts, reactions rippled through the region. The Philippine Department of National Defense issued a statement calling the US position consistent with international law. Vietnam's foreign ministry expressed serious concern, echoing calls for respect for UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Meanwhile, Beijing's response was swift and defensive. A spokesperson from China's foreign ministry accused Washington of distorting facts and interfering in regional affairs, adding that the South China Sea is not a hunting ground for outside powers. That rebuttal only deepened the fault lines. For Washington, the issue was about maintaining freedom of navigation and protecting smaller nations from coercion. For Beijing, it was about historical sovereignty and the rejection of what it calls Western containment. Between those narratives lies ASEAN, cautious, divided, yet increasingly aware that neutrality may no longer shield it from confrontation. Throughout the day, journalists followed Hegseth's movements closely. After his speech, he met privately with defense ministers from the Philippines, Vietnam and Indonesia. The discussions, according to officials familiar with the matter, centered on maritime security coordination, intelligence sharing, and the upcoming ADMM+ maritime exercises that Beijing had tried to influence by questioning their chosen locations. For the US, supporting ASEAN is as much about presence as policy. Washington's recent push to strengthen alliances from Manila to Hanoi has been underscored by defense agreements, port access deals and arms sales. Yet Hegseth's words reflected a shift in tone, less about confrontation, more about collective defense. The emphasis on "you have seen it, the world has seen it" was not only rhetorical, it was a call for shared accountability. Analysts note that the timing of his remarks is no coincidence. The ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting followed weeks of renewed tensions, including an incident where a Chinese Coast Guard ship allegedly rammed a Philippine supply vessel near Second Thomas Shoal, injuring several sailors. The footage released by Manila was met with outrage at home and condemnation abroad. Hegseth's reference to "it has been filmed" pointed directly to such evidence, now viral across platforms. In parallel, the geopolitical chessboard continues to shift. Japan, Australia and India, members of the Quad, have all expressed solidarity with ASEAN states facing maritime pressure. Even the European Union has increased its naval presence in Indo-Pacific patrols. Meanwhile, the US has quietly expanded rotational deployments in the Philippines, signaling a long-term commitment to the region. Yet within ASEAN itself, unity remains fragile. Cambodia and Laos, both heavily indebted to China through infrastructure loans, often soften joint statements on maritime disputes. Malaysia and Indonesia, while vocal about sovereignty, prefer quieter diplomacy. The Philippines and Vietnam, by contrast, have taken a more public stance, framing China's actions as direct violations of international law. By evening, as the ministers posed for their traditional group photo, a tableau of formal smiles and intertwined hands, the undercurrent of unease was unmistakable. Kuala Lumpur's polished setting could not disguise the deeper rift forming across Asia's maritime frontiers. Hegseth's remarks, both confrontational and conciliatory, had crystallized a shared anxiety, the fear that what happens in the South China Sea will not remain confined there. In his closing remarks to reporters, the US defense chief reiterated his key message. "Dialogue must continue," he said, "but actions must be consistent with peace." It was a subtle yet firm reminder that Washington's patience, while intact, was not limitless. "We will continue to engage," he added, "but we will also continue to defend the principles of freedom of navigation, sovereignty, and respect for international law." The press conference ended, but the echoes of his words carried beyond Kuala Lumpur, across embassies, naval command centres, and policy think tanks from Singapore to Washington. For ASEAN, the question now is not just how to respond to China, but how to define its collective future amid the pull of rival powers. In a world where diplomacy often unfolds in sound bites and satellite images, Pete Hegseth's speech was both a soundbite that resonated and a warning seen from space. The South China Sea, glimmering beneath its calm surface, remains one of the world's most volatile fault lines, a place where geography meets geopolitics and where the balance of power is tested one ship at a time. And as night fell over Kuala Lumpur, one truth lingered. The dialogue may be peaceful, but the waters beneath it are anything but calm.